Welcome to the Collective Impact Learning Lab pre-session webinar, Tools and Techniques for Achieving Results. My name is Marita Irby, and I am the Executive Vice President and co-founder of the Forum for Youth Investment. And also here with me in today's webinar is Robert. Robert?
Hi, everyone. This is Robert Albright, Director of Programs with the Collective Impact Forum. It's great to talk to you all today and join Marita in this webinar.
So today's webinar, we're really going to do an overview of the concepts that we'll be looking at in our 3-day learning lab. What is collective impact? What is that all about? And what does it really mean to take a big picture approach to this work, aligning across multiple issues, working in a whole community way? And we're also going to give you a little bit of information about the preparatory work to do as you're coming in, because yes, this really is a learning lab, and there are prereqs to be able to come into that room together. One of the things we've gotten in terms of feedback from previous participants is it really helps for the time in the room if people come in with some basic grounding in the concepts, and we're all able to kind of start in a kind of a even set and playing field as we're starting into that conversation. Why collective impact and why now? One of the things that we're finding in communities across the country is that communities really do feel like they're at a crossroads. Increasingly, funders are asking for a sense of return on investment, that they want to know that where their dollars are going are getting greater impact. Communities are saying, how do we really, we're doing so much work together, how are we really seeing that we're making a difference in terms of all of this effort and action that we're taking? One of the things that we're seeing in the work that we're doing is there's so many coalitions and networks and activity that's out there over the last decades that people are saying, how do we really know that we're making a difference? And one of the things that has really kind of risen to the surface over the past several years is this notion around collective impact and what does really good partnership work look like.
Great, thanks, Rita. And one thing that we've seen in our work with the Collective Impact Forum, and I know Rita and her colleagues have seen, is that when you think about all of the problems out in the world, there are often several ways that people view problems. One is that you can think of problems as simple problems, and the analogy here would be baking a cake. If you've got the plan to bake a birthday cake, you can usually follow a recipe and a certain set of steps. And even for someone like myself who's a pretty bad cook, if I can follow the recipe, usually if you follow those steps, you're going to reach the intended result each time. Another type of problem in the world are complicated problems. And these are ones where you definitely need some level of technical expertise. You need to bring multiple people together, different engineers and others. If you're trying to send a rocket to the moon, for example, this is certainly an example of a complicated problem. But if you can bring all of those technical experts together, you're going to likely be successful. A third type of problem are complex problems. And these are ones where it really goes beyond technical expertise. And you can think of the example of raising a child, where you need multiple people, again, to successfully raise a child, but it's also a very complex and adaptive challenge. Maybe one thing that you had tried with one child may not work exactly the same way with another, and there's always new information coming in. And one of the challenges, as you think about the work that you're doing, is that a lot of times people view the world primarily through the lens of simple or complicated and don't acknowledge that a lot of challenges in the social sector are truly complicated rather than, are truly complex rather than simple or complicated. So if you'll move to the next slide, one of the things that is exciting about collective impact is that it really moves beyond the notion of isolated impact. And when you view the world through the simple and complicated lens, you often do end up with isolated impact. And this is where you see funders working with individual grantees and really trying to scale up maybe individual solutions. There's the sense of working in silos or in isolation. You often see organizations that are disconnected from each other. And they're really, if you're trying to evaluate impact, it often is looking at one particular organization's impact rather than the impact of multiple organizations working together. And this should not be a surprise to you all. I think you often see this with the arrows going in all different directions. This is one of the challenges in our space, is that there are well-intentions, but oftentimes the impact can be quite isolated. But what's exciting about collective impact is it's really a different approach where you have multiple players working together to solve complex issues. And for collective impact to be successful, you really need to have interaction of many organizations working together within a larger system. So this would not just be one or two nonprofits working together. You really want to see cross-sector alignment where you have nonprofit, philanthropic, corporate, government sectors all working together and actively coordinating their action moving forward. And we often see in collective impact that if you're striving towards the same goal and measuring the same thing, it's not something that's just going to play out over a couple of months. This is usually a multi-year process to achieve success of addressing systems change and population level change. So if you go to the next slide, the definition that we've landed on in our research and consulting is that collective impact is the commitment of a group of important actors from different sectors to a common agenda for solving a specific social problem at scale. And there's several words here that are underlined for a reason. So we talked before about needing to have different sectors engaged and truly committed, not just coming to an occasional meeting, but actively involved in sharing data. They're committed to this common agenda of what the challenges and what success would look like. And there really is this attention of, or this focus on trying to solve a problem at scale, and maybe not just looking at how we can get one program to grow, but actually truly address the root causes and the issues substantially. Rita?
Thank you, Robert. One of the visuals that we've found useful for years in the communities that we've worked with across the country have found, I think, really useful is this one that takes that kind of collective impact notion and puts it into these three gears. And it's something that we've used in our work with children and youth, where we've talked about what does it take to really change the odds for children and youth, looking at that kind of population level outcomes here, by changing the landscape of what's happening in communities with families and schools and community organizations and others, by really changing the way that we business as leaders, that kind of leadership capacity. So it really is the kind of changing the odds for youth by changing the way we do business is a key focus of the work that we do with our partners here at the Forum for Youth Investment. Looking at that work and really saying, what does that look like in communities across the country, whether they're focused in on children and youth issues or just anything along that kind of age continuum in terms of human development. What does it take if you're really trying to say, we want to change outcomes for people at that kind of population level, starting with the end in mind, getting very specific about the community context, because our communities are perfectly designed right now to get the outcomes that we're seeing today. So what is it about that community context getting to those outcomes? And how do we understand that so that we, as leaders, and leaders really broadly defined, community members, parents, young people, systems leaders, and decision makers and actors at all levels in the community can come together and really say, what can we do to make a difference? What does it take to get that kind of small gear moving more effectively and faster, and get those gears to kind of come together even more tightly so that we can really get to those outcomes that we're looking for? That's one of the questions that we'll be tackling, kind of filling in as we go through these 3 days together.
And to build on what Marita, thanks, Marita. One of the things that I'll add, just to build on what Marita was saying, if you think about getting those gears to turn and really achieve impact, population level impact, one of the things that we saw in our research at FSG and our consulting work over the years, it really boiled down to these 5 key conditions for collective impact, that when we studied initiatives that were really coming together across sectors that were achieving results over the long term, these are the common ingredients that was all, and I'm going to walk through the definition in just a moment, but it wasn't something that we necessarily invented. We think this is practice that's been out there for a long time, but we just are trying to provide a common language for what we think is needed to be successful successful in cross-sector partnerships like collective impact. So more specifically, to define those five elements in a bit more detail. So the first is the common agenda. So this is where you have agreement among those cross-sector partners on not only what the problem is, but what the solution could be. So having that shared vision for change, having everyone anchored in the importance of working together to solve a complex issue. The common agenda is super important to make sure everyone's on the same page, and that you come back to it over time to make sure you're rooted in what's best for the community, not just for individual organizations. The second key condition is shared measurement, and this is where you're collecting data, you're measuring results. It's really focused on not just accountability, but also learning, and we find this is super important. This is not just about getting the right software solution where you're gathering data and learning from it, but it's actually a culture shift where as organizations you are bringing information into the work, learning from each other, you're adapting, a super important element of collective impact. The third is mutually reinforcing activities, and this is not that everyone is doing everything the same way. You want to have differentiated approaches, but you do want to have visibility into what each organization is doing. You need to be willing to adapt and change based on the emerging realities of the work. And there needs to be a real focus on coordinating through a joint plan of action. So if you're able to get agreement on the common agenda, you're starting to say, okay, what are we actually going to do collectively to achieve that shared vision? This is where mutually reinforcing activities really comes into play. The fourth is continuous communication. This is where you not only are having ongoing and open communication among the partners around a planning table, but it also gets into the importance of engaging those with lived experience, not only for feedback reasons, but to truly bring that into the process for decision making. An important element here is trust, that you have trust among funders and nonprofits and government and business, and that if you don't have that trust, that you're setting aside the time to build it through your actions, through your words, through how you structure the meetings, through where you structure the meetings. There's a lot of important elements here. And then the fifth key condition of collective impact is backbone support, where you have a separate organization or organizations with dedicated staff to do the behind-the-scenes work to help facilitate meetings. It's really think of this as someone that is really it's their day job to think about the health of the collaborative, not just their own organization mission. And they have not only the skill set to facilitate, but they also have communications capacity, data analysis capacity, and they're not the sole decision maker, but they're helping others arrive at what success should look like in the community.
So as Robert was saying, the collective impact language and terminology was really something that flowed out of looking at partnerships that were really making a difference over time and really getting to those outcomes and that population level difference that we really want to be able to see. And it was trying to say, well, what helps make those partnerships be effective? What were those conditions that really were characteristics of those partnerships? And I think a key thing in that story is they didn't start off that way, but they really kind of created those conditions over time. One of the things that we'll be looking at together is what does it take to really create those conditions, those five conditions that Robert was talking about for collective impact. These partners didn't have them at the outset. They really worked to build them. What were the people, process, and culture shifts that needed to happen to create those conditions? Let's just unpack those for a little bit now. That's what we'll be talking about really for the next few minutes in the webinar. People, process, and culture really leading to those five conditions.
Great, and to build on that concept of people, process, and culture, so specifically on the people front, one thing that we often see in collective impact is really intentional structuring of the conversation such that you have cascading levels of collaboration where you have people engaged at different levels, and it's not a top-down corporate structure, but one that is much more organic where you have information flowing in multiple directions. So this is one way that we tried to picture the different levels of collaboration and coordination that happen. So you typically have some sort of steering committee that's a cross-sector group of community members, nonprofit leaders, government, business, philanthropy, et cetera, that forms to help get agreement on the common agenda and the shared measures. They provide that kind of governance and visioning role. The backbone, as I talked about before, is often helping facilitate the steering committee conversations, but they're also involved at lots of other levels of the collaborative as shown in this picture. You typically see working groups that are the ones actually doing the action planning. So if the steering committee says or agrees on these are the 3 strategies we're going to work on, you typically see the working groups, which might be others in the community or a subset of the steering committee, usually a combination of that, get together to get much more specific on what implementation could look like within collective impact. You also see partners and community members. Sometimes these are folks that serve on working groups. Other times they're out in the community, maybe not actively engaged in the collective impact effort on a month-to-month basis, but there are lots of touch points and ways that you're bringing these key partners, whether they're nonprofit or government partners or others in the community like families and those with lived experience that you want to make sure are benefiting from the work. This point around public will is one last thing I'll say, which is super important, and this is not just about having a town hall every 6 months and checking the box that you have quote-unquote built public will. The initiatives that we have studied and that we'll talk about in more detail during the Learning Lab do a lot more than just that, where they're actually designing conversations to bring family members and youth into collective impact efforts as the advisory committee or inviting them into the working groups. There's lots of ways that you could structure this. The public will is a super important part, and it gets back to that level of how are you distributing ownership and decision-making such that it's not just housed within one steering committee or one backbone leader.
Thank you, Robert. And one thing I would say about this, we're going to kind of go through this in a moment and talk about kind of different roles that folks play in these kinds of partnerships. I just want to go back to the 5 conditions for a moment, as well as looking at this picture and say that one of the things that Robert and Jen, who's also the Collective Impact Forum, and Larry on the team here and others that we work with, did to put on these learning labs. One of the things we really like to do is get a sense of who is coming into the room with us, and we do send out a survey to you ahead of time that we're going to ask everyone to fill out so we can get a sense of who's joining us in this conversation for these 3 days, so that we can make sure that as we're developing the learning activities and kind of engagement aspects of the 3 days together, we're really targeting it as effectively as possible for where you are in the work, what kind of role you have, what kind of partnership you're a part of, and kind of key questions that you're tackling. So as we look at this, I want to just ponder that there's many different roles that you can be playing in this work. You may be playing more than one in terms of the partnership that you have. You may be playing a backbone role and doing some of those backbone functions either in your organization or in partnership with other organizations. You may be a member of the steering committee. You might be lead of a working group or a member of a working group, or in some ways, many of these coalitions or networks or initiatives will have working group lead combined with the backbone and kind of a core team or a design team that's trying to work together to coordinate the overall work. You might be key implementation partners, taking on key areas in terms of the lead on some of those mutually reinforcing activities. You may be very focused on your kind of bailiwick or your very strong kind of chops might be in communications or in community engagement, youth engagement, parent engagement, thinking about what that looks like to not just do a one-time and done community meeting, but how you do that in an ongoing way. It might be data partner, helping with some of those ongoing, not just looking at the measures, but ongoing processing of the data and being somebody that can translate that and bring it back in to the other members of your coalition or initiative. Other roles, funder, policy or advocacy partner, many different parts to play in terms of this work. And one of the things we'll be asking as you fill out the survey is, what are the roles that you play? So that's a sense of the people, many ways to draw those structures, but there's lots of different aspects to what it means to bring the people and build those relationships together, and we'll be exploring some of that as we go through the learning lab. Another key aspect is process. How do you actually bring that group together, take shape over time, and how do you do this in kind of a big picture way where you're thinking about aligning the different structures that are part of the work? How do you take aim? How do you have a sense in terms of developing that common agenda, what the goals are, and how you have shared goals and vision in terms of the work, and get very specific about what it is that you're looking to do? How do you actually have a sense of what is going on locally so that you're able to bring that sort of shared diagnosis of what's happening here in my community, in my neighborhood, in my state into the work, so that you can target action and really think about those mutually reinforcing activities, not just do ready, set, and then go, but ready, set, take stock, and go. And then how do you track progress and really think about what difference are you making, be able to reflect, look at the data, have those shared measurement systems so that you can really reflect and take that into your work and think about, so who else needs to be a part of it? How does that inform how you take shape? How does that inform how you might shift some of your goal setting? How does that process kind of recur over time so that you're really honing the effort and working together in a way that is making a difference? So what does that kind of process look like? As we think about how you do all of those pieces, and this is part of what will be in your pre-reading, is the agenda and the outline as we'll go through the bulk of our learning lab, is how do you really think through every piece from bringing your partnership together and what your backbone looks like and the kind of partnership that looks like to support the effort, through your engagement strategies, the goal setting, really getting a sense of those local needs and local context, and how do you really be able to target that and inform your action planning, making sure that the work that you're doing is building on local assets, as well as identifying what key things from evidence really might make a difference in your community, and then looking at how you do that reflection over time and really improve. That's the flow of the bulk of the learning lab as we'll go through it. And then we'll be thinking about how do you actually do this in a way that's not just looking at how the issues relate and other issues relate to kind of in a whole person kind of a way, but also how it relates to other work that might be happening in your community. One of the things we'll also be trying to get a sense of as you come into the room is, where are you doing this work? Is it primarily at the neighborhood level? Are you working on kind of issue-specific coalitions? Are you part of a provider network, like out of school time, or perhaps on a specific population? Or maybe a part of an overarching leadership council that is trying to connect many issues, whether that's sort of cradle to career, or workforce investment, or some kind of a children's cabinet. One of the things we're seeing in many communities across the country is they're looking at how to do alignment work across these different layers of work that's happening in the community, thinking about how their structures connect, how their goals connect, how they're not doing all the data work separately, but they're looking at how to do some of the taking stock together so that they really can have mutually reinforcing activities and see how they're tracking progress over time. So while they may have many coalitions working in kind of related spaces, they're looking at how that work relates and getting more efficiency out of the work as well. We'll be tackling some of that in the learning lab when we get together as well. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at in terms of the process piece. Robert, that's a lot of technical. Can you talk to us about the culture?
Sure, and I think it's a great segue. I know that the technical pieces are important. It's what we're going to be talking a lot about during the learning lab, but we'll also be talking about some of these important mindset shifts or cultural shifts that need to happen as part of the work. So one important mindset shift to be thinking about is moving from technical problems to adaptive problems. That's one important challenge, it relates back to that earlier slide where I was talking about the different types of problems in the world, and we often view the world through simple or complicated. But if you're going to be thinking about adaptive solutions, those are the types of solutions to address with complex challenges. The second mindset shift is focusing not just on evidence, but evidence and relationships. So if you think about it's important to choose evidence-based practices and to identify those efforts that are going to be successful based on evidence. But you can't just focus on evidence. You also need to find ways to build trust and strengthen relationships among those who are part of the steering committee or those who are engaged in the working groups on other ways to do the work. A third mindset shift is not just having those that are day-to-day professionals in the, say, early childhood or childhood obesity space, but also those who have context expertise. So this could be youth with lived experience or family members who have a child that they want to achieve and have more success in literacy or whatever the issue might be that you're working on. And ideally, you would have a mix of both content and context expertise. This notion of silver buckshot is another important one. So it's not just having one silver bullet program, but really a collection of initiatives and programs and efforts that are moving in the same direction. And then lastly, this one is probably the hardest, but super important, is that it's not just about credit for your own organization where you afford it, but it's about sharing that credit across organizations so that you're really focused on achieving success on the common agenda, which is going to require multiple organizations getting credit, not just one.
Thank you, Robert. And I think kind of picking up on the credit and shared currency and a little on the silver buckshot is really the understanding that even if you're tackling a very targeted issue, that the issues that community members and community coalitions are tackling often relate to issues that others are tackling in the community as well. And one of the things that we're bringing in terms of the kind of muscles to build in our time together in this learning lab is how to take a big picture approach to all of this work in a way that's sort of a whole person, a whole community. What do we know about how people grow and learn and develop over time? And how does that inform how we tackle the issues, whether it's zooming in on something specific or taking a large area like health or income stability or education and workforce development or youth development or any of these kind of larger issues that look at multiple things. What does it look like to take something very specific within one of those arenas or bring together a broader coalition that's trying to tackle multiple things at once? How do we think differently as we're tackling those so that we can act differently in terms of the work? So the whole person, a whole community approach that really characterizes that big picture work really does move from tackling just one issue at a time to a whole person, whole family. It does tackle some of the proliferation of coalitions challenge that we see in many communities to an alignment among those partnerships. There's one community that I've worked in recently that had over 62 coalitions just in the children and youth space alone. So we often have that pick an issue, create an initiative approach to this. But a lot of the work that they were doing was the same in terms of tracking the data and identifying the root causes and local conditions they wanted to address. And they were looking at, well, there's got to be a more efficient way in terms of doing this work. So how can we get greater alignment in terms of that? We often have this jump to evidence-based solutions as well without really looking at what's going on here. How do we make sure that we actually have the 100% right solution for our local challenge, not for the community next door? And then what is the way to be able to do this? It's not just focusing on the problems that we're trying to prevent, but also building on the assets that we have and framing this in an aspirational way of what are the goals that we're really working towards, so that we're not just trying to say these are the issues we're trying to stop, but this is the broader direction and the real goals that we have for our families, our young people, our communities. What difference does it make to be able to put that into an aspirational frame? So there are many mindset shifts in terms of not kind of doing business as usual, and how you actually bring that into the practicalities of this work is what we'll be looking at as well. So the kind of partnerships and coalitions and initiatives that we've seen that really do create those key conditions have been thinking about all these things, intentionally structuring the work, thinking about the process in a way that is not kind of just one time through and you're done, but very intentionally learning and doing this work over and over again to refine their understanding of what's going on in the community, and then building the ways of working together and the relationships and even approaching the work with some of these key mindset shifts that really are kind of a culture shift in terms of some traditional ways of doing business, so that they are creating those key conditions of these effective partnerships that in turn are turning those gears and getting to that change in community conditions and those real shifts in terms of the outcomes that they're looking at for their community members and the broader population. How you actually know that you're making a difference in that, one of the things that we'll be taking time to do over the course of the 3 days together is answering some questions of what does it look like when you see it, and are there ways to even track it, and ask questions of how well are we doing, where are we doing it, who are we talking about as we're trying to kind of fill in the picture here a little bit, and even get a sense of what would be the kinds of things you want to be measuring in terms of shared measurement. How do we really know if we're making a difference in a picture like this? So you've heard us talk a lot about there are going to be tools and techniques that we're looking at, and it really is about giving kind of a survey of the key things that leaders are using to build their capacity to do this collective impact and change management work in a way that is sustainable and builds momentum over time, in a way that's really transferable from maybe one initiative or set of work that they're a part of to others. We've certainly had people that we've worked with as a part of learning labs and other work that we've done over time that have started off in one area of work and taken these tools and techniques and approaches over into other initiatives and things that they've been working on, and things that are measurable so that they're really informing their work and changing them over time. But that is kind of focused in on the nuts and bolts a good deal. There are also some key themes that are a part of this work. Robert?
Thanks, Rita. I think that's a really good way to think about this training, is that we want it to be very applicable and concrete, and we think the tools that Marita just talked about are things that will be very concrete that you can take out of the training. But there's also some of these larger themes that we think can help you when you're applying these tools that you'll learn at the learning lab that cut across the collective impact work. We're seeing this across our work in the field. These two big themes keep coming up, and we'll dig into these in more depth as well. So one is addressing equity. So what are the ways that you're not just applying the same approach to everyone in the community? So this is different from equality, where everything might be where you're striving for the same level of supports and resources for everyone. This is where you really are trying to differentiate the supports and the resources based on understanding the root causes of inequities and really focusing, whether it's applying a racial equity lens or looking at differences by socioeconomic status and other dimensions. We're finding this is a super important aspect of collective impact that you really need to apply across all of the key conditions to be successful. So we'll talk more about how you address equity throughout the life cycle of your collective impact work. And then the other one, which we find has come up increasingly in the work as well, is how are you responding to emerging realities? So Marita mentioned that sometimes you might have new coalitions that form adjacent to yours in the same community. So how do you respond to that to find ways to align the work? Maybe you're learning things along the way, or new data comes in, or there's a change in policy at a federal or state or local level. What do you do around that collective impact planning table to respond to those emerging realities? And we know in these complex systems that there are a lot of things that are going to change and evolve over time, so this is not a linear process. So how do you use those tools that we just were talking about to not only address equity, but also to respond to the emerging realities in the work? So two big themes that we think will come up throughout the 3 days that we're together.
So with that, it kind of wraps our formal presentation. What we're really asking you to do to be ready to be in the room together is, first, it's this webinar. We are going to be sending you the Learning Lab survey. And then there is some required reading that goes along with some of the key themes that we've talked through today. So yes, it really is a learning experience, and there are those prereqs for coming in. But we also are going to be hosting office hours, which we will send you the date and time for, so that you can have any kind of, in some ways I would say, sort of clarifying questions or comments around the material in this webinar, or logistics leading up to the Learning Lab. And I would encourage each of you just to think through, is there really kind of a burning question or a clarifying question from what we've talked through today that you could bring into those office hours, remembering that we're going to have 3 days together as we come into the Learning Lab, but we really do want to make sure that as we're coming into that room together, you've had a chance to really get your head into this a little bit and think about how it connects into your work. So we look forward to having those office hours and answering any of those burning questions in advance, and then seeing you all together at the Learning Lab in just a short time. Robert?
Thanks, Rita. It's just a real pleasure to do this webinar with you, and also to team up with you on behalf of my colleague Jen Chester. We just really value the partnership with the Forum for Youth Investment and look forward to seeing you and everyone else in the near future.
Thank you all.